Hey, how's it going? Paul here from the Rusted Pixel. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you my ZBrush process. We're going to create a donut with thick, chunky icing. We're going to be using C4D, Octane and ZBrush, of course. This is a two-part tutorial, the first part focusing on the modeling and the sculpting, and then in the second part we'll jump more into the lighting, shading and the post-production in Photoshop. This tutorial is a little under an hour long, but I really wanted to share the 6 stages that I feel kind of get you comfortably through cinema, ZBrush, creating a high poly mesh, getting it back down to a low poly mesh, and bringing it out into cinema where you can animate it, render it, and use it for the rest of your pipeline. But before all that, let's roll credits. So this image here on screen is pretty much what we're going to try and recreate using Cinema, ZBrush and Octane. As you can see, the icing is really lifted heavily off of the geometry and it's got quite a thick feeling to it. It's something I try to achieve a lot in my work. A very full feeling, lots of volume, lots of weight. You could have just drawn the spline out in Illustrator and then just extruded it and kind of blended it onto the mesh if you wish, but I just wanted to go that little step further. I really wanted to have that feeling of something that just felt thick and chunky. I wanted to animate the icing as well, so I knew it was going to be flying through the air and splashing onto the donut. So it kind of had to serve a few purposes. I really wanted it to be thickness, so I just felt like ZBrush was the right way to go. So our 6 stages are base, landmarks, masking, extracting, merging and reducing. So our first stage is base. We're going to create our base geometry in cinema, and we're going to kind of like get the look started right. We're going to get kind of like a narrow middle and quite a chunky, very thick feeling, because that's going to kind of like sell the overall look of the project. The second stage, which may feel like, oh, it's just another cinema stage, but it's actually really important and it sets you up for either a lot or a little bit of work, is how large your landmarks are, how many there is, and how far apart they are. So stage 3, masking, is our first stage in ZBrush. Here we're going to use the Wacom pen to draw out a mask. We're going to create these little arches, or this kind of like a spider web motif, and we're going to just connect between each of the landmarks, ensuring that our mask goes below each of the landmarks. So there's a little bit of an overlap, and when they get extruded there'll be room to merge and connect them. We then move on to the extracting stage. The extracting stage is very simple. We just tell ZBrush to take our mask and turn it into geometry. It splits it away and then we're left with 3 pieces of geometry. We're left with the donut, the landmarks and the new extracted geometry. This is actually quite advanced into it, this screenshot, but we're going to use Dynamesh to merge both the landmarks and the extracted geometry in one. Just at this stage here, we have used the clay buildup quite a lot. Maybe the inflate brush, the pinch brush, just to kind of like get those sculpting details. And then we're going to finally Z-remesh it, reduce all that polygon down, and then we export it and we jump back into the safety of Cinema 4D where we all know what we're doing and we can go ahead and animate, light, render, do whatever we need to do. So yeah, I think that's a long enough introduction and I think we're all ready to get into Cinema 4D and get started. So thanks very much for sticking with me. Okay, so here we are in Cinema and we're going to just create our base shape, stage 1. So I'm just going to grab a torus, and immediately that's just not stylized enough for me. It's not playful or cute enough, so I'm just going to make it a little bit more on the chunky side. I want it to look like when the icing pours in, it almost fills in this gap a lot. I'm just going to switch over to grid shading plus lines. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, like just a quick fix like that is enough. I might make this editable and just grabbing maybe these 2 loops here, holding down T or Shift, and I'm just going to flatten them off a little and then inner extrude. So this is not necessary, but this just kind of rounds thing out or flattens it off a little bit. It gives that kind of flat base. So this is not an important step, but I just want to have that idea of this donut sitting flat on the plate. So when I apply a subdivision surface, you see you get that kind of nice flat shape. And when you render it, it kind of has that thick curved outside shape to it, and then this flat piece where it was like it was baked and it's sitting on a plate. Again, not necessary. I just like to add those small touches. So this is our donut. And stage 2, we're already on stage 2, we're flying, is we're creating the landmarks. So landmarks, you can grab any shape you want, but I'm just going to grab a standard sphere. And you just want to kind of place them along the edge, imagining how you're going to paint the masks. So this can be a little bit of a tedious job. You kind of want to line them up a little bit. It's not essential that they're lined up, but it does help. I mean, like, this is all going to be just merged and sculpted later on, but it's nice that they do kind of fit in together. You can, of course, use a cloner and just grab maybe this ring here and edge the spline. And then with a cloner, using this donut spline as your object and just, you know, creating a whole group of them, and then maybe using a random on the clones just to kind of spread them out a bit. I'm not going to go through creating every one of these spheres because it's literally drag and place and rotate, and you're not going to really see the benefit of having anything. So I'm just going to jump over to how I ended up having it looking. So I just placed spheres all along at different angles, different heights. So this drip didn't get too far, so it's got a bit more of a travel space to go down. So I figured that one would be a bit heavier. Anything that dribbled way down the end, it's kind of running out of its volume. It's not too heavy anymore. This was an effect I wanted to go for. I wanted to have this idea of gathering, and then there's been still some left. It didn't turn out that nice, to be honest with you, in the final sculpt, so I kind of scrapped it. But I just imagined everything kind of looking like this. Now, this can all be done in ZBrush, of course. You can grab a donut shape and you can use the IMM brush to drop in spheres. But I just find I work a little bit quicker in Cinema. So I just figured I'll do this part here in Cinema. Kind of line up the spheres nicely where I feel like I'm most comfortable working and where I'm fastest working. So yeah, as I mentioned, these are all just the spheres here. So we have the spheres as parametrics all lined up in here, and this is just a merged, you know, it's just a group that's been merged into one. It doesn't really matter which you prefer, to export them as parametrics or as a merged group. It's up to yourself, but make sure you just export one. I mean, like, they're going to overlap if you don't remove one. So I've got my donut and I've got the landmark spheres, I guess is what we could call them. And I'm going to File, Export, and export as an OBJ. I'll pick my desktop, as cluttered as you can see it is. It's super cluttered. And I'm just going to call it Donut. Tutorial. And yeah, I mean, like, we don't really need materials, but it doesn't really matter. Click OK. So the next stage will be to jump into ZBrush. So before we get started, you can see this kind of large document here, this large shape here in our way of our canvas. We can't really access our canvas with it. This is called a lightbox. It's similar to the object manager, or the content manager, sorry, in Cinema 4D, and it's just your brushes, your models, your textures, and you can remove it just by tapping the lightbox, hide and show lightbox. So it's just like the content browser in Cinema. So what we're going to do is we're going to import our mesh. So donut tutorial. Now, of course, you can use the GoZ plugin if you wish. I just prefer to use the import tool. Click, drag, and draw it out onto the canvas just once. Once you let go of your click button, don't draw any more on your canvas, because you're just going to keep drawing out instances of the same mesh you just imported. So you're just going to keep making like copies like that, and you don't want that. So I'm going to go to Document, New Document. Nope. Dragging out one copy of it, and then I'm going to come up here to Edit. Tap Edit or tap the T key, and now you're actually free to move around and do what you wish. Again, this tutorial is just covering the kind of 6 stages that I create a simple piece of geometry in ZBrush and get it out. It's not going to cover absolutely everything, so if you're brand new to ZBrush, you're probably going to struggle a little bit. You might need to Google a few things if I skip over it, and I do apologize for that. but I will try and cover what I think most people will need. And one of the most important things is navigation, to be able to move around in ZBrush. The other things is the importance of the Shift key, Control key and Alt key in ZBrush. They're used to a massive effect in ZBrush under so many different ways. I mean, like when you're using it with masking compared to Dynamesh, the keys are mapped to do different things. So let's look at navigation first, just to try and ease you into ZBrush. But I would definitely recommend watching and practicing your navigation in ZBrush if you're new to it. So with the left click mouse button held down, you can kind of just move around the object like that. So I'm just holding down and I'm just moving about. Now if I want to pan around the object, I'm just going to let go of my mouse. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and then I'm going to left click again, and this lets me kind of like move it about the screen. So this is just left click. Now I'm holding Alt and left click. Now if I let go of Alt, I'm zooming in and out. So to actually zoom in and out, it's a little bit of a process. So just to zoom in and out of your mesh, if you're not doing anything, you hold down Alt, move it about, and then let go of Alt. A little bit confusing, I know. So it's Alt, just move around a little bit, let go of Alt. So that's just a quick introduction to moving about your scene. You can, of course, click on the different shapes of the head here and rotate. You can actually rotate this head model around. Now this is, I don't know when this was introduced. Maybe in the most recent version or one of the more recent versions of ZBrush. And this is just a silhouette, so you can kind of see how interesting your silhouette shapes is. This again is a new feature in ZBrush. It's very handy for people who are creating characters and sculptures and they want to know if their pose is dynamic and interesting enough. That's why that just little icon is right there. So yeah, I think the next stage we're going to move on to is grouping and ungrouping. So as I mentioned earlier on, there is an awful lot to learn about ZBrush. There's so much to cover that I fear I will overload you with information, but I think I need to teach you the important things, especially if you're new, as I keep mentioning. The object manager in Cinema 4D is hugely important. You apply your tags and you move your objects up and down, and the hierarchy is massively important. In ZBrush, it's not hugely important. It's your subtool manager here. So everything that gets imported in is called a subtool. This is just one subtool. Even though there's lots of different objects, it's classed as one subtool. And you can turn up and down the visible count, so you can only see one or you can see more. I like to keep it a little bit of length, so it kind of feels like the object manager to me. It kind of gives it a little bit of length. And you just left click and drag up and down here just to be able to move this about. So this is our object here. It's all merged into one. If I tap Shift and F, this is showing me the wireframe of it. So it's just showing me the I guess like the grouping of it. So everything is grouped under one color group. If I tap Control and W, it's just kind of giving it different color options, but it's all remaining as one group. So essentially what we need to do is we need this donut as one group, so we can hide it, split it, remove it, do whatever we need to, and we need these landmarks as their own group. That's our kind of first task we're going to be given. So we scroll down through the tool manager or the toolbar to find polygroups. Once you click it, it gives you a ton of options, but we're just going to go with auto group. So auto group has just put everything into its own group essentially. It's kind of better now in a way, but it's still not right to what we need. We need to hide this donut and then tell everything on screen to be grouped. So I'm pressing Control Shift, so you can see my cursor has changed to a kind of a little lasso with a kind of a polygonal square selection, and it's looking for points for me to select. So any point on this donut, I'm just going to click. So it's hidden the landmarks first. If I click again, it then hides the donut. It kind of says, do you want to keep that or do you want to hide that? So we want to hide it. So it's Control Shift and then click twice on it to remove it. So now we have all of our landmarks just floating about in space, and I'm just going to go with Group Visible. And I'm just going to Control Shift and click out here, and it brings it back. Perfect, this is exactly what we need. So we have our landmarks as one group, and we have our donut as a second group. Now again, it's still just one subtool. It's just grouped separately. So holding down Control Shift again, clicking on the donut just to hide it again. I'm going to come down here to, so under the subtool options, scroll down to split, and we're going to split hidden. and we have our donut split away from our landmarks. So this little eye icon is deciding to turn them on or off. And you can tell when you're in the canvas what object you've selected, because it'll be highlighted with its polygroup color. Now, if that's not working for you, it means you have the kind of the option turned off. So Shift F will turn it off, and it's kind of hard to tell what you're looking at here. It's hard to tell what's been grayed out. So that's why I like to leave Shift F turned on, so I can see what object I'm actually looking at. And these eye icons will turn it on and off. And then it's hard to decide, well, why is this still selected? You can see this is actually selected in here. Whatever is actually selected in the subtool manager will then appear on screen, even if the eye icons are both turned off for everything. So we're definitely getting places. I mean, like, we've got our geometry split away and we've got it grouped. So in the next stage, we're just going to make copies of things and maybe increase the topology just so it's not such a kind of a faceted shape. So before we start painting any of our mesh or doing anything else, we need to increase the resolution of our donut, because we're actually going to be painting the mask on the donut, and to paint a mask you need a really high resolution mesh. There's two ways we can do this. With the donut selected, again, Shift F, and it's highlighted with its color. We scroll down until we get to geometry, so we leave this kind of subtool section and we come down to geometry, and there's two options you can do. You can just divide it as many times as you wish, and you can see the count is going up here. So we've got 5 levels of subdivision, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, all the way up. Or, I'm just going to go back a few steps there. You can turn on dynamic subdiv. So dynamic subdiv is very like turning on and off the subdivision object in Cinema 4D. It just turns it on and off to different levels, and you can apply it, and it'll apply level 3. Now, if I zoom in, and I hold down the control key, because control is how you paint the mask, and I'm in draw mode, holding down control, you can see that the mask is quite pixelated. It's quite not very distinct. It's not going to be great for when we want to get into these smaller details. So essentially that means we just need to sorry, I'm just kind of like messing up the mesh there. We need to increase the subdivision levels even more. So I'm just going to turn off Shift F for now and turn it back on so we can get an idea of how dense it is. If you end up too close to the mesh and you want to zoom away, when you're on these outer edges outside of this white line, it's not actually going to affect the mesh in any way. That's sometimes if you're in too close and you can't get out, holding down Alt and then kind of letting go and zooming out within this white border here will get you out. So we need to increase the subdivision a little more, maybe 2 more levels. Turning off Shift F now for a sec. So you can see we've got even more squares packed in there now, more polygons packed in. I'm going to turn off Shift F. That's pretty smooth. I mean, like, that's pretty nice. I think we're going to get a nice... What would happen if we divided it one more time? It's getting quite slow now, the system. That is creamy smooth though. That's making a lovely mask. I'm going to leave it at 6 levels of subdivision. It's making a really nice mask. I'm just holding down control and I'm drawing, and it's giving me a really nice result. So before we start making a mask, I'm just going to duplicate. So I have the donut selected and I'm just going to duplicate it. Now what you can do is you can rename all of your objects here, just with the rename option, but I don't often bother. I kind of, when it gets really confusing, or if I change like maybe to Dynamesh mode, I'll rename it. But for now I know it's just a copy of this one up here. So yeah, I'm going to do the same thing here. These are my landmarks. I'm going to duplicate them just so I have an original copy. And then I'm going to come down to geometry and divide them a few times. Okay, I'm going to delete the lower res levels of subdivision just to kind of like accept that option. And I'm going to do the same here again, geometry. I've got the donut selected this time. I'm going to delete the lower levels because I've got one version where I can kind of switch back and forth between. And one last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this higher res landmark version. I'm just going to click this kind of move down option. So everything's kind of stacked now. So these are the editable versions, and these are the kind of like, you know, committed versions. These are the ones where the subdivisions have been baked in and are now kind of high res meshes. Okay, so the next stage is for us is to actually start drawing out this mask. I've swapped over to my Wacom pen now, and we're going to get a much different kind of result. If I hold down Control, you can see we're getting a much softer effect. When I press and hold the spacebar, options just pop up underneath the cursor, and you can see you can change the draw size. Holding down Control, you can see the different effects you're getting. And you know, the lighter you go, softer. The usual things with Wacom pens, nothing too unusual there. So holding down the spacebar, the focal shift is just the outer circle. So you can see we've got two red circles. The inner one is the main area, sorry, that's sculpting, and the outer one is how much it's kind of fading off and blending off. I actually want quite a crisp, sharp line, so holding down spacebar, I'm going to move the focal shift down quite a lot, so it's in line, or pretty close to in line, with the outer circle. And again, I'm going to hold down Alt and just zoom in a bit, then letting go of Alt to zoom, sorry. I'm just going to very quickly kind of draw these shapes out. So you can see why it kind of is important to be able to navigate in ZBrush. So I'm just kind of getting a rough shape very quick. So I'm zooming as I'm drawing as well. So this can get very fiddly, of course. It's just a case of making it super messy at the start and then figuring out how much of a cleanup you need to do. Now this brush is too large here. Some of these points are probably, whoops, I kind of cleared the mask. It's just a case of Control Z to go back to your mask. So ZBrush has a very handy history up here. You can kind of go back through these little squares to a certain point. So I'm actually just going to continue drawing out this mask, blocking it out, and I'll just stop talking and kind of speed it up so you can kind of see what's happening. So there you have it. That's not too bad of a mask. I mean, there's no need to be too perfect with this. It's Control to draw the mask, and then Control and Shift, or Control and Alt to remove the mask. So if you're kind of making some mistakes, you say you kind of go too far, just hold down Control and then Alt, and then you can kind of like back up on that. If you hold down Control and tap the mask, you're actually softening it. So Control Z will undo that. So you can kind of soften the whole mask if you wish by tapping it a few times, Control and then tap. But I'm just going to undo that. So yeah, that's our mask pretty much drawn out. As you can see, it's very rough. I mean, you could spend the longest time making a perfectly clean mask, but we're just extracting this just to have something to start with. We're going to mash it and push it around. We're going to blend it and blur it. We're going to use these brushes down here, clay buildup. I wouldn't get too worried about it. I'd try and get as close as you can. Some of these drips are too small. They kind of fade off. I don't like these little ones. They'll probably end up getting just blurred into the mesh and even blended away. But yeah, I mean, that's our mask, and that's kind of stage 3 of this process done. So we're on to stage 4 of the process, probably one of the easiest stages of them all. We're going to tell ZBrush to turn this mask into an extracted piece of geometry. Before I do, I might just make a copy of this. I mean, like, it's not essential. I just like to make copies of everything in ZBrush because it can be a little bit of a fiddly program. So I'm just going to scroll down and I'm going to duplicate. Again, you can rename these if you wish to, I guess, Doughnut masked, I guess. Let's tap enter. So this one here, we're going to come down here. So again, I'm under the subtool options. And right down at the bottom, we can close split. We don't need that anymore. You can see there's merge, boolean, remesh, project. We're going to go to extract. and the extract options right here. So it's going to extract a thickness of 0.02. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's generally enough. So I'm zooming in just to kind of get a good angle of it, tapping extract. Now what'll happen is if we rotate away just to kind of get another angle of it, that was just a preview. It's not an actual committed geometry, so ZBrush is kind of like, oh no, you know, it kind of removes it. So get it in at a good angle that you want to see the thickness of how much it rises off of it, and tap extract. That's pretty good. I mean, like if we go to 0.01 and extract, it's a bit too shallow. It's a bit too flat looking. It's not kind of the fun shapes we're looking for. 0.03 might be a bit too much. Extract, just check it out. We're losing a lot of the heights that we've added. It's nearly blending in now. I think 0.02 is actually a good one to work with. So 0.02, enter, extract, and we're going to accept that. So once we've accepted that, you can see now it's here in our subtool palette as extract. It's also carried over the mask as well. So if I just turn off all of our objects, you can see we've extracted our geometry. It didn't quite connect there. We can just not worry too much about that. It actually looks pretty cool, kind of splattered away as separate parts. But yeah, it's got the mask. So if we just control and drag out a square, that'll remove our mask. And Shift F, you can see it's pretty dense. So what it's also done when you extract is it's created two different poly groups. Well, yes, two. It creates one for the edges and one for the kind of front and back or top and bottom. And it adds control loops as well, these really tight loops all around the edge. So that's what the extract just does. It's really good for hard surfaces. It kind of adds the tightness to it, but I mean, like, it works great for what we're going to do. So if we just turn on everything, well, we don't need these on here. Oh, we do need that, sorry. You can see now we have our donut as one piece of geometry, we have our extracted icing as another piece, and we have our landmarks as the third. I'll just turn off Shift F, it's a bit confusing there. So our next job is to actually merge both of the landmarks and the icing together. So before we actually do any merging, again, I like to make copies of things. This purple geometry here is the extract. In case anything goes wrong, I'd like to be able to step back and kind of work on it. So I'm just going to duplicate that extract, and then I'm going to duplicate the landmarks as well. Selecting the second one I've duplicated and just moving it down in the list until it's just above these two here. So I'm going to turn off everything else just to try and make this a little bit clearer. So I'll turn on my landmarks and I'll turn on my... So these are my second copies of everything. And essentially, I just want them to be merged together. So I'm turning off Shift F just so we can see what we're looking at here. To merge, quite simple. We'll move down to the merge options. So there's merge visible, which is everything visible on screen, or merge down. So it's going to take anything from here downwards and merge it. We're in a good position for both. We can do merge down or merge visible. I'm going to go with merge down. And it's going to warn you that this is not an undoable operation. That's why I like to make backups of everything and copies of everything, just in case things go wrong. I can kind of scrap it and go back up through a few options. So, okay. If I tap Shift F, it still has our groups. So it's still remembering all the different groups. You can see it's remembered the side groups and it's remembering the face groups. It has changed their color, is all that's happened. It was a purple and now we've got a green color. But it still retained that the landmarks are one big group and the icing is another big group. So I'm going to come down to, before I do anything else, so now that it's merged, back down to polygroups, and I'm going to go to group visible. Yeah. Okay, so everything's grouped into one group, just making sure it was. And now it's still kind of, if we actually go ahead and try and sculpt any of this, it's still kind of remembering the details. You know, it's not really kind of looking great. It's okay, but it's not really what I wanted to be able to do. I wanted to be able to work with Dynamesh. I really like how Dynamesh kind of increases your topology to a huge number and you can kind of get away with doing a lot more. And Dynamesh doesn't worry about topology. So now that we have it merged, the next step we're going to do is go to geometry. I have it open here, Dynamesh, and I'm going to set the Dynamesh resolution to about 512 and then click Dynamesh. So here we are with the Dynamesh applied. You can see it's changed our topology totally. It's much finer as well. Turning it off because it's a bit of a darker color. If I hold down shift, I can smoothen this out. You can see we're already well on our way to creating this icing looking great. It kind of remembers the the loops that were put along the edges and made them a bit hard. But if I hold down shift, so you can see my cursor switches from red, which is sculpting and building up, to blue. And blue is actually softening, so it's just kind of smoothing it out. I'm just going to zoom out. So we can build up and up and up, and then soften it if we wish. When we're building up, we need a larger focal point, because if your focal point is too big and you're kind of sculpting, you get these hard edges. Whereas if we bring the focal shift back to maybe 0, you get a much softer build up. So all we're going to do in the next steps is kind of just start getting these shapes just very quickly roughed in. I mean, like, I'm not going to be too precious about any of this. It's just going to block it in like that. I'm just kind of really focusing on getting as much blocked in and getting rid of those very obvious shape transitions. So I'm just using the clay buildup, and I'm just trying to make a nice gradual build onto things. So again, as with the masking process, I'm just going to stop the recording here, kind of speed up the video, and kind of hurry things along a little bit for you. So you can do it at your own pace, but I'll just kind of rush things through. So something I want to go over there, I forgot to mention, as soon as you're probably at the sculpting stage now. Something I forgot is ZBrush has a terrible tendency to kind of pull the geometry from the back if you're drawing on something that's quite flat. It won't do it here because this is quite a large volume, but when I was trying to just sculpt there, just to kind of like give this a bit more height, it was actually pulling the geometry from the back and it was almost hollowing it out. Something you need to do to stop that from happening is going to brush, and then down to auto masking, and then just turn on back face mask. So it'll just ignore any of the geometry in the back and you can kind of continue on brushing away. So yeah, as you can see, we're just kind of building it up. I'm turning on and off this donut here as well, just so I can kind of get an idea of how everything is looking. It can be a little bit confusing to work out what you're actually working on, but you can see it's coming together. It's starting to look a little bit better. It definitely needs a little bit more work, so it's all going to just require maybe some larger strokes. The intensity, again, the intensity slider is like, how much of an effect is taking place. I don't have the intensity too high most of the time. So I'm just smoothing out all of these shapes here. So yeah, the sculpt is looking a little bit kind of worse for wear at the moment. We're not too worried about how it looks right now. I just want to kind of get across the process. The sculpting, you can kind of spend as long as you like refining it, but really I just wanted to get it to a point where I felt like it was enough for this tutorial. So all I'm using is the clay buildup brush, and there's tons of brushes to choose from by just tapping this icon up here, and this brings up your library of brushes. Or you can press the B key and then another key like the I key, and that will single out all the brushes beginning with I. So I'm looking for inflate. So the inflate brush will, if we just increase it, we can kind of really kind of sort out this effect. So I'm holding down shift to smoothen this out, and then I'm scaling this up using inflate. And you can kind of really get this kind of like drippy goo effect. And then maybe scaling it up even larger again, and just moving it slightly. Now what's happening here is this whole mesh has been moved, We don't really want that. So I'm going to mask holding down Control, mask this whole area, and then I'm going to hold down Control key and tap out here away from the mesh, and then it inverts the mesh. It inverts the option. So holding Control, you can keep tapping to invert. Now, once I start moving this, it's going to create a kind of an edge there. You know, you can kind of see it's creating a bit of an edge. It's not very nice. So if I hold down Control again and tap on the mask this time, I'm kind of softening it. And now we can kind of move it a bit better. Oops. Just clear the mask for a second. Oh, we don't need that one. Okay, so if I hold down Control, we'll try it again. There we go. That's better. And then, Control and then dragging a square out will remove the mask. Now I'm in Dynamesh mode. Dynamesh is still turned on. It's still highlighted here. So as I'm sculpting, if I just Control and drag out here, it's going to remesh everything. It's going to kind of like work how the mesh looks. It's not hugely important right now. I'm just trying to get everything to blend with the clay buildup. So you see, I'm just kind of looking for this kind of gooey effect. Again, you can use move to create folds. You can make it nice and tapered. You know, you can drag things out. Now, once you drag things out, try and remember to pull it down along the mesh. So another thing I did a lot in the final piece was I tried to add a lot of weight to the bottom ones. So I would press it down near the top like that, and then fill out the bottom, maybe even using the inflate as well. And I'm just tapping rather than brushing. I'm just tapping it very gently just to fill the bottom section. So it's still ready to pour downwards. So you can see you're getting this nicer shape. So if I just move these bits more flat in and then these bits out, just create that like teardrop shape. So that's pretty much all the steps that are involved in kind of getting all these drips to look nice and clean. Clay buildup, holding shift to smoothen, moving and inflating. And you can see how we went from this kind of very ugly shape here to this kind of much nicer teardrop shape here. Oops, I'm in move brush. So with clay buildup, I'm going to soften it. Again, I'm not too picky about how this all looks. I'm just kind of like seeing what happens. I'm going to smoothen away those pieces, holding down shift and then retopologizing. So yeah, it's just the same process all the way around. Just building up to a shape that you like, moving pieces about. Now, the move brush doesn't really work very well unless it's kind of a large piece being moved. It's kind of a little bit awkward in that sense. Shift maybe just to smoothen that out a bit. That's looking much nicer. Now the problem is sometimes it's hard to shove these polygons around in the way you want because there's just so many. It's often better to work in ZBrush in a lower res mesh. Kind of working with a lot of polygons, it may seem great at the start, but after a while it's kind of like, this is just too many. You're holding down shift and you're smoothing for such a long time because there's so much topology that needs to be moved about. So that's where the Z remesher is going to come in handy in the next stage. We're going to remove a lot of topology we don't really need. Now this isn't looking amazing by any standard. I would not stop here. I would spend a lot longer on this, but just for the sake of the tutorial, we got some nice shapes in here. This is hideous back here, but I mean, like, that doesn't have to face the camera. We could maybe build up a little bit here so there's more kind of stuff ready to fall down. You know, we could add more maybe waves of it. Like it just got poured on top and there's kind of like more ready to go down. We can blend that in. You know, just so you have like, you know, a nice bit of contrast happening. Maybe something like that. I don't know if that's working or not. It would definitely take a little bit more work than what I'm giving it here in this tutorial. I just want to get the process across so you can kind of get out and do your own kind of interesting stuff. So that's the icing looking pretty hideous. Just some nice shapes in here, some nice smoothened out shapes. But I think it's important that we just kind of get on with the next step and then get this back into cinema where it's actually usable. So as always with our process, we'll make a copy, duplicate, and hide that. And if I just turn on Shift F, you can see that's quite a dense mesh. It's super dense, it's really, really heavy. We will come back to the geometry tab, geometry, and just below Dynamesh is Z-Remesher. And we're going to Z-Remesh with a target poly count of 5. So a target poly count of 5 means it's going to try and reduce your mesh down to 5,000 polygons. And this adaptive slider here, adaptive size, is going to kind of like let you decide how strict or how loose those rules are. So dragging it way down close to 0 means you are absolutely demanding ZBrush get as close to 5,000 polygons, this number 5 here, as possible. Whereas if you're a little bit more lenient, bring it up a bit higher, you're saying I'd like 5,000, but if you need more topology, you know, go for it. So 5 is a little bit too low. I mean, like we're coming down from like 454,000 polys to 5. It's a bit of a step down. So I'm going to go with, I'll try 10 for now. So that's 10,000 polygons, and I'm just going to tap Z-Remesh. And you'll see the Z-Remesh calculation just taking place up here, and you can press escape to abort. So what it's doing is it's running an algorithm, and it's just trying to look for the cleanest, kind of easiest path. It's trying to remove topology and hold shapes. If you don't like what you've got, you can always just go back by undoing, maybe increasing the count or increasing the adaptive size. Or if you don't like that again, you can hold down Alt and tap Z-Remesh, and that'll run a different Z-Remesh algorithm. So that's not awful. I mean, like that's pretty workable. Polygon count is 22,000, nearly 23,000. It's pretty high. I'm just going to undo that. And if I bring this down lower to 10, Z-Remesh. So this is the adaptive size I've dragged down to 10, but I still have it at a polygon count of 10. So let's see what different result we end up with. The last time we were asking for 10,000 and we were giving it a lot of leeway, setting the adaptive slider up at 80. Now we're running at 10,000 with a much lower, telling ZBrush to kind of really crunch down and get closer to 10,000. So there you have it. I mean, 9,000, it got it down. It doesn't look great, really. It doesn't look amazing. It's a bit too jaggedy. Again, like I mentioned before, if I close up Z-Remesh and open up dynamic subdiv, the dynamic subdiv is like the subdivision object in Cinema 4D. So turning that on will give us an idea of what it will look like in ZBrush or in Cinema when we're back if we're using it. It's not awful. I mean, it's not terrible. Maybe it's workable. Maybe we'll keep the lower poly count and just see how it goes. So I'm going to turn that back off. So we're going to try and work with this actually, this lower res mesh. We were more strict on the poly count. So what we can do still is, of course, we can move things around. We can still use our sculpting tools, and it's actually much easier to move things around now. And smoothing is much more severe because there's a lot less polygons. So I'm just going to undo all that. I didn't really want to do that. But you can see everything is having a much bigger effect because there's less polygons. So the inflate is really kind of like powerful. So you may need to reduce the intensity of these brushes. I'm going to turn off Shift F. It can look a little bit weird. So I'm just going to add, just to have a little bit of contrast, to go from a flat wide area to a large bulbous area. Just looks a little bit nicer. Shift is, I'm going to hold down Shift. While holding down Shift, I'm going to press and hold down spacebar. You can see the shift intensity is set at 100%. Too much. I don't need to soften it that much. So to get to that, it's Shift to soften, hold spacebar to get to the options. And that's just a little bit softer now. So again, we can kind of bring back in some of those details. I'm just using the inflate brush. Maybe use the move brush, move a few things around. Again, because it's much lower res, everything is much more malleable, so you need to be a little bit more careful. Whoops, I need a move brush. I like that shape I'm getting here, this curve, whoops, shape, so I want to amplify that. And you have to remember, as you're kind of working in 3D, if you're looking at it flat down, you may end up dragging the mesh away from the donut. So you just kind of need to be careful to check all angles to make sure it's still sitting nicely on it. So some of these shapes here aren't great. This is pretty hideous. I don't know what this is at all. We'll try and make something of it. I don't like the way these three are the same size. It just doesn't look very nice. Again, this is just kind of like things you can review. You can just give it a shove up there, soften it, bring this one down to make it a bit more prominent. I don't know, I just wouldn't let that on camera. So we'll just soften this up here. You can see some of these landmarks didn't really work out, but everything is very, very changeable and adjustable. I mean, like, I can decide to inflate this. Soften, inflate, soften, inflate. Change shape entirely. Let's really make that thin. Let's see. Whoa, that's a bit too much. Right. So that was looking interesting from one angle and then terrible from another. So if I turn on dynamic subdiv and just see what we get. We can sculpt this on as well. It's a little bit slower, but we can get an idea of how it's going to look with the subdivision surface turned on. Again, I like to work in as low poly as I can, and I use a lot of subdivision surface to then bring the geometry levels back up. It's just a preferred workflow I have. If you'd rather bring in a heavy mesh, you can fire away. Whatever workflow works best for you. I'm just going to soften this up to make it super thin, like it's almost about to break. I don't like how squared off that is at the bottom. It kind of doesn't look very believable. And it's kind of coming down at an angle, so we'll need to move it in place. But again, these are all just minor details that you can make later on. Let's turn off dynamic for a minute. Whoops, not divide, dynamic. Let's just turn off dynamic for a second, and let's really inflate the inside, just so when it's tilted towards the camera, those big chunky pieces that pour down into the middle, let's just drag them down as well. Now we have to be careful here because we're starting to just stretch the geometry a bit much. Let's just soften these a bit. Let's see what that will look like. So I like how kind of irregular and lumpy this topping is, because when I was making the actual icing for the final piece, I had a kind of a frosty look. It wasn't like just pure reflective. It was kind of like a matte effect, like the icing had dried out a bit. Like it had been poured on and dried out, so there was like spots where it was more matte and more reflective. So yeah, let's turn off dynamic subdiv. And we have this final piece here. So this is our final icing. So I mean, like if we just go through the steps, we can just see, I'm just going to turn off everything. So it'll only highlight what we've got selected. So we had our landmarks and we had our donut. We increased the resolution of our landmarks. We increased the resolution of our donut so we could paint a nice clean mask. We extracted that mask and then we merged it with the landmarks and we grouped them. So we grouped them and then we turned on Dynamesh. And then we Z-remeshed it just to kind of clean it up a little bit. So the Z-remesh reduced the polygon count so we could kind of create this nice effect. And the last step is to export. And I'm going to export this as donut icing. Whoops. Okay. Now, if you wish, which I would recommend strongly as well, is you can save in ZBrush as just coming up to File and Save As, and it saves an entire project, or you can just save this Z tool, which is almost like saving an OBJ. It's like saving this little tool we're working on here in this subtool. But I prefer to save the entire project just to be on the safe side. So save as, and it'll just remember everything. So back in Cinema, I'm going to File and Merge Objects, and I'm going to grab the donut icing. It just adds a fong angle of 80. And if I just swap over to my mouse, there's our icing. After not too many steps, I mean, it wasn't too complex. Sometimes when you're watching ZBrush tutorials, it can be confusing as to why am I Z-remeshing, why am I dynameshing, why am I doing this, and why am I masking and merging. When you lay it out in steps of bring in your base, start with your landmarks as kind of a reference point of what you want to do, and then just mask off the geometry and split it away. And then you're left with all these little pieces, like these little puzzle pieces. You've got your extraction, you've got your landmarks, and you're like thinking, right, I just want to merge them. I just want them to stick together as one mesh. So we merge down, and then we just tell Dynamesh to kind of like increase the resolution like crazy so we can just do all the sculpting details. And then we Z-remesh it to bring it down just so it's more usable in ZBrush or back in Cinema 4D. So if I just turn off my spheres, and if I just create a simple cinema material just to drop on a color, just so you can actually see the actual difference of how it looks. Yeah, I mean, I think in the next tutorial we will go ahead and render this out, kind of light it up and use Octane. Of course you can use Redshift or Arnold or V-Ray or whatever you prefer to use, but I'm going to jump in with Octane. So that's it. Thanks very much for sticking around till the very end. I really hope the process has made it a little bit clear if you're confused by ZBrush. The next part of the tutorial we will focus on lighting, shading and post-production, so please make sure to check that out. Thank you very much for your support, of course, and a like and a sub would be greatly appreciated. Also, I just want to mention really quickly while we're at the end of the video, I do have a modeling workshop on Mograph Mentor where it focuses on stylized modeling in ZBrush, in Cinema 4D, if you want to check that out. So yeah, thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next one.